Hi, it's Rob B here with Rob D. And this week on the Property Podcast, we've got a story about a developer whose project overran, came in quite late, and went so over budget that they made a loss. Oh, and that developer was us.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Property Podcast, where every week property investors come together to be informed and inspired. And today, the source of that information and hopefully that inspiration is our own failure. This is going to be part confessional and part therapy session, and it's not going to be comfortable for us to record, but there should be lots of lessons for you to come away with.
So it's time for our news story of the week. And the headline, Rob, of this week's story reads, Homes Fitness Act allows tenants to sue landlords over property condition. What's going on?
Yeah, I thought I'd dig out a good news story to get us going this week. You can now be sued by your tenants. Congratulations. This actually sounds a lot worse than it is. So this is a new law that means rather than having to go via the council to report disrepair, tenants can now go directly to court and sue their landlord if their home is unfit for human habitation. Now, opening up the possibility of being sued clearly is not a good thing. But in reality, this isn't such a big deal. Firstly, and most importantly, because being fit for human habitation is a pretty low bar. If you're renting out a property that's not fit for human habitation, then you're doing something wrong. You probably should be making some changes there, or possibly you're in the wrong game altogether. So that's the obvious thing. But you might also be thinking, well, what about tenants just causing trouble and reporting something minor and suing you over that to blow it out of proportion? It could happen, but again, that's pretty unlikely. First of all, because suing is not cheap, and whether there'll be any no-win, no-fee support, I don't know. And it takes a lot of paperwork and it takes time, and it's unlikely to be something that a tenant will do unless they absolutely have to. Unless it's the only way they can get something that needs to be fixed. The second reason is that there's no protection from retaliatory eviction when going down this route, so the landlord could legally serve notice on them if they went to the courts rather than going via the council. But the most important reason why this is probably not really going to come to anything is tenants are unlikely to know about it. And I think that's really the problem with the whole system. Clearly things aren't perfect, but the solution always seems to be to layer on top another law or another regulation when the existing ones aren't really being enforced. So a large proportion of landlords don't know what their responsibilities are and what they should be doing, and that's unacceptable. They should be. And a lot of tenants don't know what their rights are. They don't know what the different routes are to get things put right or to get redress if things aren't as they should be. And that's how these bad landlords are allowed to get away with it. So we will see how this pans out. I think it's very unlikely to be anything that we'll ever hear much about because I don't think it's really going to be used, but worth addressing just in case you've seen the headline this week and it scared you a bit. Okay, so Rob, are you sure you want to have this conversation?
Oh yes, Rob. This is going to be therapy. This is going to be good. I'm ready.
Well, I'm pouring my coffee now and ready to get into this and have a bit of a post-mortem. We're going to be talking about the first development that we've ever done. So this is not a refurb. This is new construction, new build houses, and how in some ways it was a really big success. But in some fairly important ways, there was a lot that went wrong as well. So this is going to be quite a painful conversation, I think, Rob, but an important one, because these aren't the conversations that you tend to hear. You don't tend to hear about the things that go wrong so much. But before we get into the pain, let's have a bit of context and let's explain what we're talking about here. So the site is just having the finishing touches put to it as we speak. It's a development in Crewe of 14 new build houses. And Rob, the good news is that they look absolutely fantastic.
You know, the crazy thing is, Rob, is that if anybody went to look at this development, they would be impressed. They would be patting us on the back, and maybe we would deserve a few pats on the back, but we'll hold judgment to the end to see if you still feel the same. Because they are stunning. They are beautiful houses. And I think the passion of this project, particularly being our first development, is definitely paid off for the people who've purchased these properties. Because what we've built are just stunning homes. From the paint that we've used, down to the carpet choices, the kitchen choices, and even things like the doors, we've been very particular about. And if we were just judging this on well-built, beautiful homes, we're getting 5 stars. So there's the good news, Rob. We've built beautiful homes, and they have been built, and they are something we can be very proud of. So that's what we've built, but we didn't build it at random, Rob. We chose Crewe as well. You know, we're very particular about the location, because from a buy-to-let point of view, Crewe is ticking all the boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to go and check it out for yourself and see the end product and see the quality of the specification, check out the doors, lovely doors, then you can go to the show notes for this episode and you'll find a link there to an Instagram post, which has got lots of lovely photos on there. Pretty straightforward, really. Crewe is a fundamental hotspot. You can see why by looking at a map, looking at where it is, looking at the transport links, the trains and the motorways. Because of that, there's really strong local employment, both in Crewe itself and in nearby commuter locations. And as a result, lots and lots of demand. And that demand is only growing as the region as a whole strengthens. So a really obvious investment case. Nothing particularly clever there. Okay, Rob, take us back to the start. That's how we chose the location, but how did this project actually get started?
So we found this site not on a major listings portal. It was by doing a bit of digging, finding out who owned this piece of land that we were attracted to, making contact, putting an offer in. Negotiations went pretty well. That was good. We got it for the price we wanted. It came with planning. Again, that was great for us because this was our first development and we just wanted to get going. And we've partnered with some great architects. So, as I said, it come with planning, but the architects helped us enhance the site and really guided us through the process. And we still work with them today. And those architects have been absolutely fantastic. We decided to not put a contractor on this site to develop it all out and then hand the keys back to us. We decided that we were going to manage this and bring in different trades and manage them. So bring in the ground workers, bring in the roofers, etc. That was the decision we made. But from early on, we hit a few stumbling blocks. So what we hadn't anticipated or really thought through enough at the beginning was the amount of conditions that came with the development. Conditions are planning conditions, and you have to sometimes meet certain conditions before the development starts or before you finish. It depends on the local planning authority and what they want doing up front and what they want doing at the end. Unfortunately, with Crewe, they wanted the vast majority of the conditions satisfied before we started. And Rob, this is where our first delays came about because we actually had to meet these conditions. And it was while meeting these conditions that the local authority asked us to replan part of the site and change some semi-detached units into detached units, which added to our cost base, and we'd already sold them by this point, and delayed our start date. So we were on the back foot from the off. But if that was all that went wrong, I'd definitely take it. But unfortunately, it wasn't.
So that's the kind of thing that happens. And if we'd been more experienced, maybe we would have planned for that a bit better and had more contingency in terms of budget and time. But that in itself obviously wasn't enough to see the project go massively over time and go over budget to the point where we made a loss. Oh no, there was plenty more that went wrong on top of that. So let's get into all of it and the lessons that come out of it. So planning was a pain, but then as soon as we got shovels in the ground, things continue to go wrong.
Yeah, so the first people who go on site are the people who do the groundworks. That's foundations in the real world. So they saw all the foundations out the groundworks team. They started the original team, and then they disappeared. No, it wasn't magic. It was another job that they decided to take on. Crazy thing is, it was a much smaller job, but they went away. And while they were away, we checked out some of the work, and some of it was good, and some of it wasn't so good. The combination of being unhappy with the work they'd done and the fact that they just disappeared meant that we felt the need to replace them. Now, that came at a cost, a financial and a time cost. But it was a decision that we felt we had to make at the time. Now, you could go, oh, well, that's really unlucky. But I think actually there's lessons you could take away from this, and we could have prevented this happening. The first thing, Rob, is this ground worker came via a referral. And we normally say, oh, referrals are good. But the referral came from someone who's not actually in the construction industry. So this was more on a personal level that this person vouched for them. And I think if we did this again, I'd look back and go, okay, I want referrals from people with experience or who've worked with them and seen their work done. Sounds really obvious now, and this is going to be a theme. But back then, someone you trust, and I still trust them today, says, I vouch for this person. This is a good guy. He runs a good company. We went with them. But on reflection, we could have prevented this, and we will in the future. The other thing as well, the contract that we had wasn't good enough, and it didn't clearly state what we wanted. And contracts are a big thing with development. You can get people to price by the day on these type of things, but what you want is a job quote. And with the ground workers, it was in this sort of vague territory of, was there a contract, wasn't there, is this by the day or isn't it? And that also hurt us. So the groundworks are a big part of a development, and delays and costs hit you hard.
Yeah, and if you're stepping up from doing refurbs and things like that into developments, maybe this contract point is something that you wouldn't have realised, because you can kind of get away with a moderate refurb without having really detailed written contracts. Just a general understanding over email or whatever may well be enough. But then when you're into big projects like this, it becomes so important. And that one, unfortunately, we found out the hard way.
Yeah, Rob, and another thing we learned the hard way, it's just the amount of admin and paperwork involved. It's absolutely bonkers. So from getting the utilities company on site, you think you just book a date and they turn up, but no, there's a lot more to it than that, and it takes months and months and months to sort out. That was kind of expected. Any development has that, but it caught us by surprise. But something that probably catch a lot of developers by surprise was the work we had to do around HS2. Because Crewe's going to benefit from HS2, which is fantastic, it means for developers, there's more work to do, which isn't as fantastic. And this was a long process where we had to put a report together with the help of HS2, and we actually ended up working with the top guy there, the person who's pretty much running the whole thing, getting his input to demonstrate that our development and site was perfectly fine and wasn't going to cause any issues, sending that off to the local planning authority for them to read it, confirm with HS2 that they'd said that, and sign it off. So what do you think? A couple of days? A week? 2 weeks? No. This ended up being over 8 weeks, that process. Again, all this admin, Rob, started to layer on top of each other, and the site began to get later and later because of it. But actually, Rob, we probably should have done a better job.
Yeah, it's something that I'd completely failed to appreciate before getting involved in this kind of world, is that developments are pretty much as much an admin project as they are a construction project. You'd think that actually building the thing was the hard part, and it can be. There's always challenges along the way, but all the admin piece is just as important. And if you're not anticipating that and you're not on top of that, that can be the part that actually causes the delays. And anyone with experience in this kind of thing is probably smacking their head right now and thinking how silly we are for not realising this. But I don't know if that's something that you can really know going in. But obviously, now we do know it can be overcome. You just need to spend more time up front, finding out what's needed, finding out how long it takes, and then adding a healthy margin to that amount of time that you think it's going to take, because there's always delays when it comes to paperwork.
Now, as I've already touched on, we sold these all off plan, and they went really quickly because we sold them at a really great price. Like, they were cheaper than a Taylor Wimpey development down the road, and we built them at a better spec. So, absolute win for our clients. But what wasn't a win is the delays, because we communicated what turned out to be a very optimistic completion date. We went, okay, if everything goes right, it'll complete on this date. And that was the date we communicated. And as we've already started to discuss, lots of things didn't go right, and we passed that date. The other date we passed, though, was the long stop date. And the long stop date is a date you have in your contract that says, if you miss this date, then anybody who's committed to buying this property and has exchanged on this property can withdraw. Now, we missed that date as well. And again, because we were over-optimistic, the amount of time we put for that long stop date was unrealistic. The long stop date probably should have been the completion date, and then the long stop date we put in should have been significantly after that. As I said, people can pull out now, and some people did. And I don't blame them. You know, we said we were going to do something and deliver it on this date, and we didn't. So some people got fed up and pulled out, and then we subsequently resold those plots as well. But it's then refunding the deposits back, reselling that particular plot. It's hassle, it costs money, a client's disappointed, you're disappointed. That's a lose-lose. All right, there's someone else who gets to come in and buy it, they win, they're happier, and obviously the delays aren't nearly as much for those people because they've come in with a new expectation. But still, it's pretty gutting to say you're going to do something and not deliver on it. That one hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good to break a commitment. It actually feels really, really bad, but it could have been even worse. We're actually lucky to be in a position where we're able to resell these really quickly. That's not a difficult sell, because at this point the people buying are effectively getting an off-plan discount without buying off plan because they're practically finished. But still, if you didn't have contacts with investors, or if you were planning to sell to owner-occupiers, it is going to take time, and that time could cause real problems. So optimism is a wonderful trait, and it's absolutely necessary when approaching any kind of new project. Otherwise, you wouldn't get into it. If you're going to be pessimistic and think it would be a disaster, you wouldn't do it in the first place. But what we found out is that optimism should not extend to long stop dates.
No, Rob, optimism should not extend to long stop dates. That is an area you should be pessimistic. That's putting in a date to cover things for when they go wrong. Another thing that went wrong, there's a theme here, is that it's quite bad that you take longer than anticipate to build a development out. But you know what else is bad? Not making any money. And in fact, worse than not making any money, making a loss. Because, we have actually made a loss on this development, which is actually quite hard to say out loud, and there's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of people listening to this story. But again, it's important to share these things, because we could just pretend that, okay, we were late, but we built a beautiful product, but we were late and we lost money. So how on earth did we do that? Ultimately, we didn't monitor our costs properly. And that sounds like again, a pretty crazy thing to say. And this was a combination of the amount of resource that we had in terms of people monitoring the costs, but also down to some individuals who were reporting those costs as well. A combination of factors meant that the information being provided and then having the resource to check that information meant that costs run away. And things like replacing a groundworking team didn't help. But again, being honest, it wasn't just that. We overspent in many other areas. And part of it was because we probably underpriced it and overspec'd it. But also, part of it was just poor management.
Yep, and this is something that we should have been aware of from the start. Actually, it probably dawned about halfway through. And when that happened, we brought more resources in to give the team the ability to monitor costs as they should be monitored and get things back under control. And that helped, and that's great. But by that point, a lot of the damage was done. So it's great to have learned the lesson, and it's not something we're going to do again, but it would have been nice to learn that lesson a little bit earlier, because if we'd done that properly from the start, we might not just be sitting here with a great product, which is lovely, but a great product and some money, which would be even better.
So as we got to the end of the site, the investors we worked with who purchased these properties got their mortgages. But because of the delays, many of their mortgage offers start to expire. So we had to send out surveyors again. And then something bad happened. Another thing. One major lender said, right, I'm not lending on this site. Which one lender is okay, but it's the impact of that one lender. You could say, oh, well, one lender, there's loads out there, which there are. What's the issue? Well, the issue was what played out after that. We had a solicitor that the clients were using, and they were mostly using the same solicitor, a solicitor we'd actually recommended. But that solicitor got spooked by that and decided to take it upon themselves to act like a mortgage advisor and started to tell the clients that you were going to have issues selling this site in the future. This site's now unmortgageable, which you could say, well, she might be right. But a week later, more mortgage offers came in. But the news that was being communicated by this solicitor was completely the opposite of what was happening. And for me, if I'm being really honest, I think this solicitor was covering themselves rather than protecting their clients and their investment interest, which really didn't sit well with any of us.
So most of this wouldn't have been an issue if it hadn't overrun in the first place. So naturally, when things start to drift in one area, that introduces complications down the line that otherwise wouldn't have been there. But we also could have chosen a more pragmatic solicitor to work with. And all solicitors are going to be risk averse. If they see a potential risk, even if it's a really small risk, there is no benefit to them in saying, don't worry about it, just go for it. They can never get in trouble if they tell you not to do something. They can only get in trouble for telling you to do something. So it's worth being aware of incentives. But of course, different solicitors fall at different points along the spectrum and are more or less concerned with covering themselves versus getting the best outcome for the client. So when that started happening, it felt like it was an event that was out of our control, but actually it was. We could have just not been late, and we could have chosen our solicitors more carefully. So that's quite the catalogue of catastrophes there. At just about every point, starting from before it even started and going all the way up to right to the bitter end, things were going wrong non-stop. Clearly we got really unlucky here. Well, not really, Rob.
No, things go wrong. That's something that's to be expected. We talk about this on the podcast all the time. Things will go wrong. What hurt us here, the person at fault, the person responsible for this, is me. I was heading this project. And ultimately, the buck stops with the person who's in charge. You can point fingers, and it is easy to do that because you can tell yourself a story that this person let you down, that contractor let you down, the paperwork is ridiculous, that lender is stupid, the solicitors are being a nightmare. You can tell yourself all those stories. And you know what? You'll feel better if you do. But it's not the truth. And you won't learn if you do that. Ultimately, this was my project. I run it. It's down to me. My lack of experience hurt us. My optimism hurt us. And it resulted in a site that went over time and over budget. Yes, we did build a beautiful product. So I'll claim that one. I can take that too. But the lack of experience and me probably being a bit too remote from the project is really the ultimate reason for this happening. So the lesson here is, if you are not experienced running a project that is completely out of your comfort zone, then you may not want to run the project yourself. I did have experienced people around me, but the head honcho in this scenario, me, didn't have the experience. And that cost us.
I think that's a really healthy attitude to have. And it's not easy. Blaming yourself is not the easy thing to do. But it's only by assuming that things are within your control that you can actually do something about it and do something next time. If you just went in and go, oh, the solicitors are idiots, the ground workers were hopeless, the council are incompetent. If you did all those things, you know what? On the next project, exactly those things would happen again. You'd come up against the same people standing in your way and creating obstacles. But if you take ownership, then you can do something about it. And I think that's psychologically not a natural thing to do. It's easier to blame other people than it is to take responsibility for yourself. But it's certainly a more helpful attitude. So that's a great way of looking at it. But still, Rob, it isn't easy to talk about now. And it must have been so much harder at the time. Like, there are points during this where like every day there was something else going wrong. You're still trying to deal with the last thing that came out of nowhere and caused big problems, when suddenly something else completely unrelated would pop up and you'd have to start sorting that out on top of the previous thing. It was pretty unrelenting. So how did you handle this personally? There's quite a bit of pressure. There are large sums of money involved, lots of people involved who you've got a responsibility to. And that would be enough if this was the only thing you were doing. You're also simultaneously running quite a big business doing lots of other things, which involves yet more responsibilities to yet more people for yet bigger amounts of money. I'm not trying to make you have a breakdown here, Rob, but I think it's worth asking. How did you handle this personally? Because that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I am by default an optimistic person, but even this got on top of me at times. And right in the thick of it, I was devastated, if I'm being honest. I felt like I'd let a lot of people down. I'd let clients down. And this is the first development, really proud. This is like to be the showcase of what we could do. And we were late. I've let team members down who have worked so hard to get this development through and have put in crazy hours and helping me out with challenge after challenge. And I felt so bad for them. I'm devastated that I've said to everyone in the business, right, I'm going to lead this. And I failed. You know, there's no way of looking at it. On this project, is it a pass or a fail? I failed. So in the thick of it, I found that really hard. It's a pretty heavy burden to carry. But luckily, I'm very good at snapping myself out of these situations. And I think it's a great life skill to pick up. It's easier to say, harder to do. But if you can try and work on this skill, it will set you up for life, which is taking a situation and using tools or techniques to snap yourself out of them and then turn it into problem solving. Because if you're problem solving these issues, then it's a positive thing. If you are wallowing in them, then that is a negative process. It's happened. It's how you deal with it now is up to you. You can feel awful and feel sorry for yourself and sorry for everyone else, or you can fix it. And that is a huge lesson that we can all take away from this. Hopefully, if you do a project, you don't get as many things going wrong as what's happened here. But whether you just do a normal buy-to-let, a HMO project, a refurb, or you go on to develop, at some point, something is going to go wrong. I can guarantee you that. It's how you're going to handle that'll make the difference. Now, when it is particularly bad, you need to find out a way of snapping out of it. Like I said, I go for walks. I find that if I go for a walk, it clears my mind. And actually, by the end of the walk, I'm often coming up with beginning of solutions to the problems. Find your trigger, find your way of getting out of that self-pity and that wallowing state and get yourself into a problem-solving state. Because the quicker you get there, the quicker you can fix things. So it has been tough and it's really tested me. But in a weird way, I'm grateful for those tests because I've learned so much from this process. It's been the most intense learning process, the most intense time because I've been working and running businesses with you, Rob, in things I know about, things that I can do in my sleep. You know, I understand investment. I understand strategy. We understand how to run a lot of these buy-to-let related businesses. We understand how to podcast. This is a joy. This isn't even a work. This is a pleasure. But by doing something that was so hard and so difficult, it's actually, in a weird way, been incredibly rewarding.
I hadn't really thought about it that way before, but I think it's such an important point, like how quickly you can snap yourself out of it, because when something bad happens, if it's sufficiently bad, you're not going to go into problem-solving mode straight away. You're just not. And feeling a bit overwhelmed by it and wallowing in it, I think is natural and it's going to happen. But if you can get that time down from feeling sorry for yourself for a week down to a day, then a morning, then an hour, the quicker you can get into that problem-solving place, the better. And then once you're there, everything's okay, because everything in life is really just problem solving. So you go, okay, this has happened. What do we do? Well, I'll do this and then that and then that. And then if that doesn't work, I'll do this. And you just kind of get into that mode. Then all you have to do is work through those things that you've come up with. And if someone else was telling you about something that had happened, you could probably be there instantly, because it's just a problem that's there to be solved. But when it's your own thing, that is really hard because you've got all these emotions going on as well. So I'd never really thought about it before, but I think it is such a valuable life skill to be able to shortcut that process as much as possible and get to that problem solving point. And the only way to get there probably is by stretching yourself and doing things that are uncomfortable. It's something that you need to practice. And the only way to practice is to keep putting yourself in uncomfortable positions, I suppose. But maybe that's enough practice, right? It was a hell of a journey, learned a lot, great product at the end, fantastic, but hard work. Shall we just stick to the buy-to-let, Rob?
Rob, you know the answer.
I know the answer.
Of course we're going to do it again. I touched on this in the Instagram post that Rob mentioned, that's in the show notes, and I talked a little about this then. But we are absolutely going to do another development, and actually, we're ready for our second. We're about to start on site, and we're closing in on our third and fourth projects as well. We are fully committed to this. What we are also committed to doing is taking the lessons from this. I won't be the head honcho moving forward. And we will be hiring in a very experienced team to make sure they run right. That team will be watched by ourselves with these lessons banked, knowing that we now have better questions to ask up front before we start these developments and during the development to make sure that these things don't happen again. Or if they do happen again, because things do go wrong, we catch them really early on. This has been an education. It's been expensive. And as you know, Rob and I love free education. This has been an expensive education, but it's been absolutely worth doing. We are so proud of what we've created here. And yes, it's hurt at times. Yes, it's been stressful at times. And yes, it's been painful for other people and we've let other people down. But if we just gave up now, what's the point? Why did we go through it all? We've gained so much from this in terms of the lessons that it would be a waste and a shame not to go again. It would have been a disaster if we wiped our hands of this. But what this becomes is a beautiful opportunity where now we can go on to do even better work, create better products, bring them on time, on budget. So, like I said, I'm so grateful that we've done it and we've been through this because we've learned a lot of lessons on our first development and probably more than average has gone wrong, but that has made us better developers. Like I said on the post, it's easy to play in the safe zone in life. So many people do. We just go, what's easiest? What's safe? What's just going to keep us comfortable? And I get that. I do. But actually, I think it's when we push ourselves, we become investors for the first time. We move on to a bigger project that we've not done before. You end up developing, you take on a new job. Whatever you do in life, it's when we take those risks, it's when we make ourselves feel uncomfortable that the beautiful stuff happens. And I think that's so important to remember that whether you take this lesson for property or for life, make yourself take the braver option. Push yourself that you're uncomfortable because it is a special place. It can be hard and it can be scary, but it's only when you do that that the rewards play out. And because it's been so dark at times and because it's been so hard at times that it's actually far more rewarding. If you climb up a hill, it doesn't feel that rewarding. But if you climb up a really tough mountain and it takes a lot out of you, when you reach the top, it's an incredible feeling. And for me, that's what life's all about. It's going for the big mountains. It's taking those risks. It's making yourself feel uncomfortable because the top, when you get there eventually, feels pretty good. So this week for Hub Extra, Rob, we've picked out a quote, and it is an absolutely perfect quote. Not because I'm going to visit this place soon, Disneyland, but because Walt Disney achieved so much. And his quote here is absolutely perfect for some of the things we've discussed today, which is, if you can dream it, you can do it.
Yeah, and in fact, the full quote was, if you can dream it, you can do it. Always remember, this whole thing started with a dream and a mouse, which I think is great. And it's such an important point. Disney now is a global brand. You hear the word Disney and you think of these theme parks and amazing movies and everything that goes along with it. That wasn't always the case. That was never destined to happen. At one point, he was just a guy, and he was a guy with an idea. And it was a big idea, and he made it happen. And it wasn't easy, but he did it. I think that's such an important point, and it ties into a book that we've talked about on the podcast before, which we're both really big fans of, The Magic of Thinking Big. A lot of the time it's about the vision and the ambition. You're unlikely to go far beyond the extent of your vision. You could fall short, but you'll never go far beyond it. So if you don't have a dream and you've got really modest ambitions, you're not magically going to have this great big thing that takes over the world. It's never going to happen. It's only by dreaming big and having the vision that you've got any chance of getting there. And the other thing that I think is really important, the other side of this, is it's really hard to pursue something big and not do any of it, not get anywhere. So if you take the example of running a marathon, you might train for a marathon, set out to do it, and then get injured round about mile 20 and not complete it. So you didn't fulfill your dream of completing a marathon, but you're a lot further along than you would have been if you hadn't got off the sofa in the first place. And I think that goes for almost everything. By trying something sufficiently ambitious, you will get to at least some point along the way, which is further than you would have been. And even when things don't work out, and there'll be lots of times when that happens, even then, there'll be things that you'll learn from it that you wouldn't otherwise have known. And it's a nice way of ending an episode on a positive that on the face of it has a lot of negatives in there. But the overall message is positive. In our case, we set out to do something and we did it. Didn't do it perfectly, lost money, but ended up with a fantastic product that wasn't there before and ended up with lots of lessons that we didn't have before. And ultimately, that's not a bad result at all.
So that brings us to the end of our therapy session, or as we like to call it, the Property Podcast. We'll be back on Tuesday, helping you out, answering your questions, and we'll be back next Thursday with what we hope will be another valuable episode. So until then, everyone, take care, be brave, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.